I woke up at 3:17 a.m. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah. I groggily rubbed my eyes and reached for my phone, the light from the screen barely cutting through the darkness. The room was still, heavy with silence, except for the low hum of the air conditioner. The message was short. Baby is sleeping. Hospital is quiet. This place is eerie at night. I read it again, my mind struggling to catch up with the words. She was in the hospital, alone. I knew she had been admitted yesterday, but something about the way she worded it made my stomach tighten. There was an attachment, an image. I opened it. It was a photo of a hospital hallway, dimly lit, with shadows stretching along the floor. At the far end of the hall, there was someone, I couldn't quite make out. Just a shape, standing still. The silence in the photo was suffocating. I didn't know what to make of it. Why would she send me this? Something about that hallway felt wrong. I stared at the photo for a long time, the hairs on my neck slowly rising. The hum of the air conditioner seemed louder now. My thumb hovered over the screen, replaying the image in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I shoved my phone aside, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But I couldn't ignore it. The image had stirred something in me. I couldn't go back to sleep. The next morning, I went to the hospital. I couldn't get the thought of Sarah out of my head. She'd been so calm in the message, but I could tell something wasn't right. She never mentioned feeling uneasy. Never mentioned anything about the place being eerie. That word kept replaying in my head. When I arrived at the hospital, I wasn't sure what to expect. I walked in through the automatic doors, the sterile white walls feeling cold. The hospital seemed normal enough, quiet, almost empty. But my mind kept drifting back to that photo. I made my way to the receptionist desk, hoping that seeing Sarah would put my mind at ease. "Good morning," I said, my voice too loud in the empty space. "My wife, Sarah, was admitted here last night. Can you point me to her room?" The receptionist looked at me, her face neutral. She glanced down at her computer, then back up at me. "Sir," she said, her voice steady but firm. "There's no patient by that name here." I blinked, trying to process what she'd just said. "What do you mean?" "My wife was admitted last night. She sent me a message, she's here." She didn't even look up at me this time. Her fingers tapped on the keyboard. "We have no records of your wife ever being here." I laughed nervously. I had to be mistaken. Maybe she was in a different part of the hospital, or her records hadn't been updated. "You're mistaken. My wife sent me a message this morning. She said she's in the maternity ward. She's here." The receptionist looked up at me, her eyes wide now, like she was seeing something she hadn't expected. "Sir, we don't have any records of your wife being here." Her voice shook a little as she said it, but it was more than that. It was the way she said it that made my skin crawl. Like there was something more behind her words. I didn't know what to say. I stood there for a second, trying to catch my breath. My mind was racing. There had to be an explanation. But my mind kept going back to that photo. I turned and walked away, my feet dragging as I made my way toward the maternity ward. Maybe they'd know something there. I had to see Sarah. I had to know she was okay. The maternity ward was quiet. The usual hustle and bustle were missing. The lights overhead were bright, too bright, and the smell of antiseptic was sharp in the air. I stopped by the nurse's station and asked again, "Sarah Stevens. She was admitted last night. Where is she?" The nurse looked up at me, her eyes cold. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't have any record of a Sarah Stevens." "You're sure she's here?" I couldn't make sense of it. I was sure she was here. I had the message, the photo. I felt like I was losing my mind. I tried to shake it off, but every second that passed, the anxiety gnawed at me. I moved down the hallway, checking each room. Empty. Nothing. Room after room, I found nothing. No signs of Sarah, no sign that she had ever been there. Her bed was stripped. There were no belongings. No trace of her at all. I pulled out my phone again, checking the message she had sent me earlier. The message was there, but it was different now. It no longer said, "Message delivered." It said, "Message undelivered." The world around me felt like it was crumbling. The cold white walls seemed to close in. I stood there in the hallway, staring at my phone, not understanding what I was seeing. I could feel the blood draining from my face. Something wasn't right. I turned back toward the receptionist's desk, but it was as if I wasn't even in the same hospital anymore. The hall seemed longer. The doors didn't seem to lead where I expected. I wanted to scream, to demand answers. But something told me the answers wouldn't come. I couldn't leave. I wouldn't leave. I found a seat in the waiting area, trying to calm myself. My phone was still in my hand. I couldn't stop staring at that message, at the fact that it had been undelivered. What did it mean? I had to keep looking. I couldn't leave Sarah alone. She had to be here. She was here. I didn't know how much time passed before a nurse approached me. She was young, her face pale. She moved toward me slowly, like she didn't want anyone else to hear. "You shouldn't be here, sir," she whispered, "but if you really want to find her, I think I can help." Her voice was low, like she was afraid someone would hear. "There's a ward in this hospital that doesn't exist on record," she continued, glancing nervously around the room. "Some people call it the silent ward." I didn't know what to make of it. A ward that didn't exist? What was she talking about? I stared at her, my thoughts scattered. "Take me there," I said, my voice trembling. She nodded and led me down a hallway. The air felt colder here. The lights above seemed to buzz faintly. I couldn't tell if it was the lights or my nerves that were making me feel sick. The nurse stopped at a door at the end of the hall. It didn't look like any of the others. There was no sign, no label. Just a rusted metal door with no handle. "This is it," she whispered. "I can't go any further. If you enter, you may not come back." Her words were chilling. But I couldn't stop now. I couldn't leave without answers. I reached for the door, my hand shaking as I touched the cold metal. Inside, the hallway looked exactly like the one in Sarah's photo. The same dim lighting. The same shadows stretching out in front of me. The same faint sound of whispers in the distance. It was all too much. I stepped forward, the door creaking closed behind me. The silence here was different. It wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating. I took a few steps, my breath catching in my chest as I walked deeper into the ward. The rooms along the hall were empty. Old, unused. The beds were covered in dust. The cribs were abandoned. The wallpaper was peeling off the walls, curling at the edges. It felt like time had stopped here. Like nothing had moved in years. But then I saw it. A small, delicate object on one of the bedside tables. Sarah's wedding ring. It was sitting there, almost as if it had been placed carefully. I picked it up, my hands shaking, unable to process what I was seeing. The whispers grew louder, like they were calling my name. I had to get out. But I couldn't leave yet. I had to know. Where was Sarah? The lights overhead snapped off, plunging the hallway into darkness. "Sarah? Sarah?" I called out, my voice loud in the silence. There was no answer. Then, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Sarah. "They told me you checked me out. They said you took the baby. Where are you? I looked at the screen, my fingers trembling as I typed a response. I never checked you out. I'm still looking for you. But the message wouldn't send. No response. I heard footsteps. Someone was coming. But the silhouettes were wrong. Nurses, but their faces were hollow, their eyes too dark, too empty. They kept getting closer, but I couldn't move. Suddenly, everything started shifting. The walls elongated. The doors disappeared. The hallway stretched out further and further, like it was pulling me into it. I couldn't see Sarah. I couldn't hear her anymore. And then I heard her voice. Don't look at them. Just run. I didn't know what to do. I ran. The hallway seemed endless. It twisted and turned, warping around me as I ran faster and faster, desperately trying to escape. I saw her. Sarah. She was standing in a room, but as I reached for her, she vanished. Sarah. I screamed. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't find her. I ran through the endless hallways, the lights exploding above me, the sound of footsteps echoing all around. Finally, I reached the door. I didn't know how I got there, but it was the only way out. I pushed it open and stumbled out of the silent ward. The door slammed shut behind me. I was back in the hospital. The receptionist was staring at me, concern on her face. "Sir, are you okay? You've been standing there for 10 minutes, talking to yourself." I looked at my phone. There were no messages from Sarah. No photos. Her number didn't exist. And then I looked down at my hand. The wedding ring was still there. I froze. I know she was real, I whispered to myself. I know she was here. But if she never existed, who sent me those messages? I couldn't leave. I refused to. There was no way I was walking out of that hospital without Sarah. I kept sitting there, in the waiting area, my fingers endlessly scrolling through Sarah's last message on my phone. The words from her still echoed in my mind. Baby is sleeping. Hospital is quiet. This place is eerie at night. What did that even mean? What was she trying to say? I couldn't stop staring at the photo she'd sent. The hallway, that dark hallway. Something about it made my stomach turn. The shadowy figure at the end, the one I could barely make out, still haunted me. I had to find her. I couldn't just go home. Not like this. I had to be sure Sarah was okay. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The receptionist didn't know anything about Sarah. The nurse, earlier, had no answers either. No one seemed to remember her being there. Was she even there at all? I couldn't think straight. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. And then she approached me. A nurse. She didn't look familiar, but her eyes, they were filled with something I couldn't place. "You shouldn't be here, sir," she said softly, almost like she was warning me. "But if you really want to find her, I think I can help." I looked up at her, unsure of what to say. Was this another dead end? Or was I finally going to get answers? She leaned in closer, her voice dropping even lower. "There's a ward in this hospital that doesn't exist on record. Some call it the silent ward." The words hit me like a cold wave. A ward that didn't exist? Was she serious? I stared at her, trying to understand. "What do you mean? A ward that doesn't exist?" The nurse glanced around quickly, making sure no one was listening. "I can't explain it all. But if you want to find her, I can show you where it is." I wasn't sure what to think. Part of me wanted to walk away, to forget all of this. But another part of me, the part that still hoped I'd find Sarah, told me to follow her. "Take me there," I whispered, almost without thinking. She nodded and turned to lead me down the hall. The atmosphere felt heavier now. The hospital seemed quieter, colder. The hall stretched on endlessly, the pale lights above casting strange shadows on the walls. My heart thudded louder in my chest as I walked behind her, every step feeling more uncertain than the last. The nurse stopped in front of an old, rusted door. There was no sign. No label. Just a plain, aging door that seemed completely out of place. "This is it," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't go any further. If you enter, you may not come back." The warning didn't hit me the way it should have. My mind was too focused on finding Sarah. I had to know what was happening. I reached out and grabbed the handle, feeling its coldness seep through my fingers. I didn't know why, but the second I touched it, I felt something. It wasn't a physical feeling. It was more like a pull, like something deep inside me was urging me forward. I pushed the door open. The hallway inside was exactly like the one from Sarah's photo. I could hardly breathe. The walls were old, worn down. The same dim lighting. The same shadowy stretches of space. The same eerie silence. Everything looked frozen in time. As though nothing had moved here for years. I took a step forward, my feet heavy on the floor. The floor creaked beneath me. I walked down the hall, looking into the rooms as I passed. Each one was identical to the last. Old hospital beds. Dust-covered cribs. Faded wallpaper peeling at the edges. The rooms seemed abandoned, forgotten. It felt like no one had been here in decades. But then I saw something. Something that made my blood run cold. A wedding ring. Sarah's wedding ring. It was resting neatly on a bedside table, like someone had placed it there carefully. I stood there for a long moment, just staring at it. Why was it here? How was it here? I picked it up, my fingers trembling. The ring was warm, almost like it had been recently worn. I stared at it in disbelief, unsure of what I was even holding. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. Then, the lights above me shut off without warning. Suddenly, everything was pitch dark. I didn't move. I couldn't. The silence was unbearable. My mind was racing. Where was Sarah? Sarah? I whispered into the darkness. Sarah? I heard nothing. Just my voice echoing back at me. Then, my phone buzzed. I fumbled to take it out of my pocket, my hands shaking. It was a message from Sarah. "They told me you checked me out. They said you took the baby. Where are you?" I read the words over and over, my stomach twisting. How could she be sending this? How could she be in two places at once? I quickly typed a response, my fingers moving faster than my mind could keep up with. "I never checked you out. I'm still looking for you." The seconds stretched on forever. No response. I stared at my phone screen. The darkness around me felt oppressive, suffocating. The silence was unbearable. Then I heard footsteps. Footsteps coming from behind me. I turned, but I saw nothing. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. It was as if the air had turned to lead, weighing me down. And then I saw them. The nurses. But they weren't like any nurses I had seen before. Their faces were blurred, their eyes hollow and dark. They didn't speak. They didn't move like people should. They just stood there. Watching. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But my feet were stuck to the ground. I couldn't move. The hallway around me started to distort. The walls seemed to stretch, elongate. The space around me started to shift, like I wasn't in the same place anymore. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Sarah. Don't look at them. Just run. I didn't think. I just ran. The hallways twisted and turned. The walls closed in around me, stretching farther and farther as I sprinted, not knowing where I was going. I saw Sarah. She was standing in one of the rooms, but when I reached for her, she vanished. Sarah. I screamed, but she was gone. I kept running. I couldn't stop. The walls were closing in. I didn't know if I was in the same place anymore. Everything was changing. Warping. Finally, I reached the door. I didn't know how, but I reached it. I pushed it open and stumbled out into the hospital again. I was back. The receptionist was staring at me, her face confused. Sir, are you okay? You've been standing there for 10 minutes, talking to yourself. I stared at her, my mind a blur. What had just happened? Where was I? I checked my phone again. There were no messages from Sarah. No photos. No sign of her at all. I looked down at my hand. The wedding ring. It was still there. I couldn't breathe. I know she was real, I whispered to myself. I know she was here. But if she never existed, who sent me those messages? I could feel it in my bones. The tension. The fear. It was like something was creeping up behind me, just waiting for the right moment to strike. But I didn't care. I couldn't stop. I had to find Sarah. No matter what it took, no matter what it cost me, I had to find her. I couldn't go back. I couldn't leave without her. I looked around, feeling the weight of everything closing in on me. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever. The walls were changing. No longer just walls. They were elongating. Moving. Shifting. Stretching like they were alive. Every step I took only made it worse. The space felt endless. It felt like I was trapped in a place where nothing made sense. Then, I heard it. Her voice. Sarah's voice. It echoed through the hall, but it wasn't like it should have been. It was wrong. It was distorted. Her words twisted into something I couldn't quite make out. John. John, where are you? I froze. I had to stop myself from calling out. I had to focus. She was here. She had to be. But everything around me kept changing. I couldn't see her, but I could hear her. I checked my phone again. There was a new message from her. Don't look at them. Just run. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Run? What was I supposed to run from? Who was I supposed to run from? I was already running. My legs were moving before I even realized it. I had no choice now. I had to escape. I ran. The hallway kept stretching. It kept twisting. The lights above me exploded, one by one, sending flashes of light into the darkness. I didn't know how much longer I could keep going. I could hear her voice again, calling to me. But I couldn't reach her. She was always just out of reach. I ran faster. The hallway seemed endless now. I was never going to reach her. It felt like the whole world was collapsing around me. And then, in the distance, I saw her. Sarah. She was standing in a room, but as I got closer, she disappeared. Vanished. Just like that. Sarah. I screamed. But she didn't answer. I couldn't stop. I couldn't let this place win. I had to find her. I had to keep looking. But the hallway kept stretching, the lights kept exploding, and my feet kept moving, desperate to escape. I didn't know where I was anymore. The walls were closing in. The air felt heavier. I couldn't breathe. My legs were aching, but I had to keep running. I had to find her. She was out there, somewhere. I could still hear her voice, calling out to me, distorted and muffled. I couldn't make sense of it. I couldn't make sense of anything. But then, everything stopped. The hallway was gone. The lights went out. The silence was so thick, it felt like it was choking me. I was alone. And then the door appeared. The same door I had come through earlier. The same door that had led me into this nightmare. I didn't know how it was there, but I couldn't waste time thinking about it. I had to get out. I pushed the door open, gasping for air. The light outside was too bright. It hurt my eyes. I stumbled out, but the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. I was back. The hospital was the same. It was familiar. The walls, the floors, the doors, the receptionist's desk. I looked around, disoriented, not understanding what had just happened. I felt like I was losing my mind. The receptionist stared at me, her face filled with concern. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked. "You've been standing there for 10 minutes, talking to yourself." I couldn't answer her. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, my mind racing, trying to piece together what was happening. I reached for my phone. Maybe there was something on it that would explain everything. But when I looked at the screen, I felt a chill run down my spine. There were no messages from Sarah. No photos. Nothing. Just an empty inbox. Her number didn't exist. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked down at my hand. I don't know why, but I had a feeling I already knew what I was going to find. And there it was. Sarah's wedding ring. It was still in my palm. I couldn't move. My heart was frozen in my chest. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew one thing for sure. I had seen her. I had heard her. She was real. But if she never existed, who sent me those messages? There's no going back from this. I'm left to wonder if it was all a dream, or worse, a nightmare from which I'll never wake up. But one thing is certain, Sarah was here. And I'll never forget the way she called my name.